Hello everyone, welcome to the How To Academy Small Business Masterclasses with the Great British Entrepreneur Awards and Salesforce. These free masterclasses will arm you with actionable steps that you can take within your business to improve processes, plans, and outcomes. In today's session, we're joined by Chu Chow as he discusses productivity methods for small businesses. There is an opportunity to ask questions during the session. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can pop this in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer these towards the end of the session. And with that, I'll pass over to our host today, Francesca James.
Thank you so much for that, Chloe. And thank you so much for joining us today, Chu. You've been a long-term supporter of the Great British Entrepreneur Awards and community. So I'd love to start before we get into the questions that we've got. And of course, anybody in the audience who's watching this on our live streams, please do pop in questions and we'll pose them to Chu. Could you tell us a little bit about you and your entrepreneurial story and history and where you are now?
Great. Well, thanks, Fran. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure every time. I really enjoy supporting the community. The GBA has been an amazing organization to be part of. My background, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been very fortunate to have had a rich career. I started my career about 20 years ago. I used to work for the likes of Amazon, Yahoo, Microsoft, big corporates, the first 10 years of my life. And after 10 years, I realized that's enough. I wanted to do something different and really follow my passion. And that's when I started in 2011, Perkbox. Some of you may know Perkbox is an employee engagement platform. We've done really well, over 150, 200 employees. It's multinational. I've been part of that business from the beginning until 2019. I was a co-founder and CMO there. And then I realized I wanted to do more. So luckily, I had an opportunity to start a second business called Mintigo. Mintigo is a financial well-being platform. We help businesses engage with employees from a very financially sort of healthy way. So what I mean is that we help employers save on NI through salary sacrifice pensions. Lots of money to be saved. Happy to help whoever doesn't know about salary sacrifice pension, but the key thing is to really help both employers and employees be financially healthier. So that's my new business, and it's not always easy. It's been always, it's been challenging but rewarding. I think so that's my career. It's been, going through the big corporates, being really successful with Perkbox and now with Mintigo. I'm very sort of blessed and sort of grateful. And over the years, of course, I've learned a lot. And these sessions is hopefully a time for me to share whatever I know with you, and hopefully that would help you succeed as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, look, absolutely. As a community, I think many people will be aware of Perkbox. It had the most phenomenal growth journey. And obviously, with that comes some challenges. And we're here to talk about productivity today. And I guess I'm going to start off by asking, why is productivity so important with a small business? And that's the opening question.
Well, the thing about small businesses is that we don't have a lot of resources. Time and attention is very, very scarce as well. And so with all that, you need to be productive. And the question is, how do you manage that? What is productivity? For small businesses, it comes in different forms. How you manage your time, how you manage your staff, money. These are all things that affect productivity, or as a result of good or bad productivity. But like I said, it's these things that small businesses live and die by. They need to be very productive. It's really key.
And what I was going to ask is, how you mentioned obviously there's so many different types of productivity within a business, but how can productivity be measured, and what's your experiences that you've had within Perkbox in doing so?
Yeah, well, for me, for a lot of startups, small businesses, I think the best way to look at productivity is impact to business. What does that mean? It's not about just going through the motion of measuring metrics and measuring this, measuring that. Ultimately, it's impact. Will this, person or this set of activity or these goals move the business forward? Yes, it can translate to some key metrics, and I think that's the key thing. You got to have the right goals in place, and so that translates to metrics. And some roles are much easier to measure than other roles. So we can go back, into that a bit deeper. But really, for me, I would measure through metrics where possible, goals achieved, and impact to business are the ways I would look at measuring productivity.
Thanks, Chu. And I like to remind anybody that's watching this on social media or with us on Zoom, please do pop your questions into the questions box if you've got anything really specific that you'd like to ask Chu. Chu, you mentioned that your former career was in large corporates. So how do productivity methods differ when you're in a small business when compared to a larger organization?
Well, I used to work for one of the largest, Microsoft, and as well Amazon, and the culture is very different, obviously, from a startup. Large organizations tend to have more sort of metrics-driven ways of measuring things. They're a lot more sophisticated. They have lots of tools to measure and divide each of the roles up. They measure and then they stack rank you based on how you perform within your role within the organization. It goes on and on and on. But what's also interesting is that they have more sophisticated programs to pinpoint problem areas, so you can be more productive. And the description of productivity is very, very precise in large organizations. We don't have that in a startup. We just don't. In a startup, it is back to the basics. Okay, right. Are you using your time properly? Are you impacting the business? Are you moving the business forward? And so those are things that, as a startup, you're just forced to kind of come up with things all the time. But the big difference, I think, between a startup and a corporate is that corporates have systems that are grounded, been around for years, very kind of structured, doesn't really change. Whereas for a startup, productivity methods change all the time. If it doesn't work, you need to kind of reassess it. You need to be open to changing things if it doesn't fit. And that's the I guess, successful businesses recognize that when you're not productive or you're not measuring the right things, you need to almost sort of answer that as a leader and just like, sorry, I looked at the wrong thing. Now we're shifting gears. We have to actually focus on this. And this requires us to be perhaps less productive initially, but more productive in the future. But those changes, those pivots within how organizations measure and change the workflow is actually very different from corporates, but something that we need to embrace if you want to be successful as a small business owner.
Yeah, we've had a great question in from Fraser. Fraser Edwards joins us on Zoom today, and he said, do you have any tips, Chu, or advice for small-scale startups who've got a remote-first team? Obviously, that's a challenge that so many people are going to have encountered for the first time ever, and I'd love to get your take on that.
Sure, that's a great question. I have a remote, so my Mintico is a small team as well, so we don't have 14 people, mostly remote. The challenge really is around communication, creating that culture, and really what kind of management style do you have, right? So, if you came from a background where you really have to have people in front of you, you have to measure the time they're in the office and time they're out of the office. Translating it to an online remote work force is actually quite difficult because you almost have to rethink how you manage people. When you hire people in remotely, it's actually easier because they have been trained, as from the very beginning that this is how it works. It's more about you as a manager. How do you transition from that world into a new world? But when you hire new people into this new world of remote working, it tends to be easier. It's that sort of the legacy, the transition from the old to the new that's actually hard. But really the tools that I use, obviously like everyone else, we use Slack, make sure that, communication is really important and dedicate time for somewhat face-to-face time, but even though it's on Zoom, 15 minutes stand up in the morning every day or something like that. And recognize when people need more attention and just put in more time. So I know we normally meet once a week, but it looks like you're struggling. Let's do every other day, and really just kind of focus and then just put slots into the calendar all the time and make that a normal thing that that our meeting is coming up. We've met yesterday or whatever. So don't make it control you. You have to control the system. You have to control the fact that Zoom meetings are a normal thing, and now we're going to put that more into. So that's how you improve the interaction. But ultimately, what you want to do is maintain culture. So when all these things have to be sort of with the backdrop of, am I creating the best culture possible? And ultimately, culture drives productivity.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and obviously, maintaining that culture and it has certainly been a challenge for many businesses over the past 18 months. And I think another thing that I know that you're passionate about as an entrepreneur, and I guess Mintico, is certainly addressing a large part of this challenge is employee wellbeing. And I guess now we're not all in the office Monday to Friday, all day, every day. Do leaders need to look a little bit differently as to whether hours spent working are more important than employee well-being when boosting productivity? And what's your take been on that?
Sure. That's a good point. And I think this varies from company to company, also from role to role. Some roles are, well, there are two types of roles I see. One roles are less discretionary, meaning, it's time in, it's operational, and every minute counts towards producing a product or an outcome. And so in that sense, hours do matter more so. So you almost have to kind of manage that appropriately. And then there's another set of roles, which is actually more discretion based. So, office knowledge workers are really hard to manage in terms of hours because it's value of thinking time versus the amount of thinking time, right? Or amount of work time. So it could be an engineer trying to crack this piece of code and they just need a bit of time or a lot of time. We don't know. But what we don't want is to put caps on when they have to be in the office or when they have to work or not. So like I said, recognize those types of roles. To sort of operation production type of roles, we need to manage hours. Whereas the discretion-based time, you really allow them to be flexible. You need to, because they may be very creative or very kind of strategic. These things shouldn't be bound by time. Should be bound by results. So recognize that as well. So hopefully that helps in terms of what I'd say in terms of time. Set goals, make it really clear. And that's how you kind of control the hours spent or the time in the office. It's like, look, you can do whatever you need to do, but I need this to be delivered and have them commit to an outcome. So outcome-based management is really, really what I'm trying to say here, right? So it's not about the inputs, it's about the output. And if you're really clear about the output and the goals, it makes life a lot easier. And then you ask them to account for that, make people more accountable for the outcome. It's about delegating, empowering, all these great things you talk about, good management. This is really accelerated with COVID and remote working, because it forces managers to be better managers than before. Some people don't know how to do that well, but that's part of creating a great business. Great business are nothing more than a collection of people working together very well. And so that's the glue is the management that keeps people working together.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. In your personal experience, you mentioned obviously, to be more productive as small businesses, we need to look at output rather than input. What does make someone more productive and therefore their output better in the workplace? Is there a one size fits all? Are you having to cater to different job types, different personality types? I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, so typically people, from my experience, people who are very productive tend to be very organized and are very good communicators. That's also key, right? So organization, what do you do when, knowing how to prioritize their time, because, they can be very hardworking, but not very productive. That's very different, right? Someone could be, sweating and just busting the butt every day, but they're not getting the outcome that you want. Is it a matter of prioritizing their time, or are they not communicating the barriers, the challenges, and the obstacles so they can get help? Right? Some people just sit in silence or waste time trying to figure out this Excel formula when someone else next door knows how to do that in 10 minutes, and they spend 3 hours trying to fiddle around with a spreadsheet. So those are how I describe what makes a really productive person. Those who are very well organized. They talk to management. They talk to each other. It's just like, are these the right goals? Right? Is this the right outcome? So once that's agreed, they go forward on that. So that's about management and organizational skills. And then when you hit obstacles or a rough patch or whatever, they let it be known, because that is time wasted if you kind of try to solve it yourself, or let the organization to reassess the priorities, because this is actually a blocker. Or if they find a solution that's a lot faster, they'll tell others and say, hey, look, this is a better path to success. So that's what I look at as a manager in terms of trying to assess people on their productivity, what kind of people they do, what kind of people they are, and how they interact with the team.
Do you think that that's something that we've lost, or is going to be a challenge going forward? You mentioned that you might have person A that finds a workaround in 2 minutes, and person B that spends 3 hours looking for that solution. I mean, I guess arguably a lot of that would have been sort of solved by hearing the frustration of a colleague in the desk next door. Do you think that that's something that that there's a solution for, or that we need, or that leaders need to find a solution for? I guess it's those sort of water cooler moment type interactions, those learning by osmosis and hearing what's going on the other side of the office.
Absolutely. You missed that, look across the desk, a face or a facial expression, speaks volumes, right? We miss that in the remote world. A lot of communication happens visually, absolutely. And we don't have that in a Zoom world, and that's hard for a lot of people. And a lot of people and some personalities are not suited for remote work at all, because they'll just, keep them inside and not explain and express the frustrations. And that's hard, but that's a management challenge. What we normally do is we use Slack, but we create lots of different channels. So help channels, creating a culture where it's okay to raise the alarm or to talk about, help and needing help is really important, because, we don't want people to suffer in silence. That's really, detrimental to the culture, the productivity, to a lot of things. But in this world of, we hire you to do a job, you got to do it well. It creates this sort of, opposing force of, okay, I have to show that I'm good, that I'm strong, that I'm competent. So I shouldn't be asking for help. So one way to do that is create work groups or streams within HubSpot. Not HubSpot, sorry, within Slack. So then we can monitor that. Whether it's public or private, that's one way to kind of help people kind of ease through rough patches. Another way would be just to have anonymous surveys, just to say, hey, what are the, generally, how's the business being run? How do you feel about management, our focus, strategy? And then that couples in ideas, and that translates to discussion points. And hopefully that will solve a lot of these problems as well. But you're right, it's really hard to do these things remote. You just have to rely on technology as much as you can.
Well, that really nicely brings me on to my next question, but I want to get quite specific here. And I want to encourage anybody that's watching this that has a productivity tool that they use themselves that they absolutely love, please do share it. You've mentioned Slack a few times. Now, when you and I first jumped on the call, we said, right, we're going to have to quickly mute Slack so that it's not popping and making all sorts of noises through this chat. But I'm aware that there probably are some organizations that maybe aren't familiar with Slack. And me personally, it's something that we introduced probably 4 years ago, and now my inbox is the only things that come in there are from clients and customers, and we use Slack for any internal comms at all. Chu, could you give a bit of an overview on Slack and why you've mentioned sort of the channels and the streams and the ways that you use it, but I guess if we strip it back to someone who's not heard of or been on Slack before, that would be really useful. And then I am going to put you on the spot about some other tools that you use within Mintigo as well, and obviously if anybody posts their own favorites in the chat, perhaps we can talk about those too.
Sure. So I guess I'll be speaking my age or referencing my age when I say that, back in the early days, we used to have Yahoo Messenger, MSN Messenger. I don't know if you remember those days. And that was the precursor to Slack. Obviously, it wasn't well, structured, but people were chatting all the time on these MSN, messengers. And, it is about very rapid real-time interactions with people. And what Slack does really well is it creates a culture where people don't have to kind of, there's a big divide between what email is being used. Before, it used to be email and it has to be, people have to wait for the response and all that kind of stuff. Email is now for like announcements, whereas real-time communication needs feedback or collaboration type of work. You need a workspace for collaboration. And so what Slack has done really well is it's redefined how people interact. Slack is more than just a communication tool. It's a workspace, because you can share files, you can put things together. Now I use Slack, but there's also Microsoft Teams and lots of other kind of, communication productivity tools, putting people together, sharing ideas, screen sharing. It's huge. And I think one of the things that I think has really helped with remote working is creating this culture where people do a lot of screen sharing. It's actually a lot more efficient than if you were in an office. You have to kind of walk around, look at the other person's desk, and kind of peer and say, okay, what are you doing here with this spreadsheet? Whereas on a screen share, you just go, boom, okay, here's the spreadsheet I'm looking at. How do you fix it, right? Or this presentation. So it does create massive amounts of productivity gains, but you have to be able to use it and create a culture where people are happy to be on Slack or Microsoft Teams or what have you. And I highly advocate, creating the right channels where people talk about different themes and topics, and so they'll just add to that, or also get alerts as well. So people get alerts on things that have happened across the organization, but also screen sharing. I think that's one of the best things you can do remotely, and that beats, one of the few things that beats in terms of the real life face-to-face kind of interaction, because you just show them exactly what you're doing. And literally sometimes I'll just log in and I'll just turn on my screen share before the other person as well. As soon as they pop onto the screen, they see my screen when I'm looking at, so it saves the time. So here's the problem, how do we fix it? And it's a lot more efficient than I've seen in the past.
Yeah, we completely we live on Slack as an organization, and there's the as you mentioned, it's that real-time communication where it's okay to reply with a thumbs up emoji, or to react to something to show your thoughts on it. Whereas with email, as you mentioned, that the time that it would take to actually share and to get something done internally was always significantly longer. And I guess important to point out what organizations who aren't using something like Slack can do is it can be a bridge between, it can also act as external communications. If you're working with a client that is happy to be on the platform, you can create channels where that client will only have access to that particular portion of information. I definitely urge everyone to check it out. I don't think Chu or I are on commission. It's just something that really has helped us in terms of being more productive as businesses. And Chu, what about other tools? And I guess other tools that maybe work with Slack, because there's integrations that you can set up, and then there's tools that work on their own that can really help to up productivity.
Sure. Other tools I use for project management would be something like Asana. So ASANA. It's great for project management. You can create work groups and tasks, and that gets assigned to for collaboration. So we do a lot of our design work there and product development work there. We use Trello as well to move the cards around, so it's very easy, kind of less so, but it allows you to kind of manage tasks and group them together. So it really depends on the function. So that's more for sort of like development work. So marketing and product development work, we use those tools. For like sales, we use HubSpot. I've used Salesforce in the past. Actually, at Perkbox, we use Salesforce a lot. We were one of the bigger Salesforce users, and we had loads of licenses. It's a brilliant tool. Salesforce is one of the most powerful technologies out there, but you need to configure it for your business. I guess the progression typically for a lot of organizations is that Salesforce is something you move into typically. Obviously, it's enterprise grade. Then you have HubSpot, where without HubSpot, that's what we use now because it's low entry points, very easy to get on. Obviously, as the organization gets more complex, we might have to consider, whether Salesforce should be the next level up. But the key thing about this technology, all these tools, you need to dedicate time to learn it. And one of the mistakes I've made in the past is you kind of, onboard a tool or software, you kind of assume that everyone knows how to use it. And especially with pipeline management for sales on HubSpot, we never really spent enough time into more recently. So these are all external tools. You can actually, within the tools, there are lots of other features that you don't know about. And I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you don't spend time doing that. And then don't delegate that. That's one lessons I've learned. I used to give it to others, kind of configure it. But then again, you're the leader, you're the business owner, what have you. You need to spend time learning those tools because it's so strategic to the growth of your business. And that's one of the lessons I've learned as well. So that's that. And also for closing sales, we use PandaDoc. Makes it a lot more professional looking. So you can send proposals on PandaDoc. You can see when they opened it. You can update the PDF, makes it look nicer. So and you use DocuSign for signatures. So lots of all these tools coming together. And one of the things that you also have to bear in mind is if you don't use it, don't pay for it, cancel it, don't just accrue all these costs as well. And so that's the flip side of having all these great tools. They come at a cost. So just be mindful of what you use and what you don't use. And
yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it soon adds up as you add license and license and license. And if you then realize that you're not using something. So apologies to everyone. The window cleaner decided to turn up just at the whole time during this session. But yeah, we've got another vote in the chat from Harry, who says he uses Trello. Trello is just such a brilliant visual tool to see what you've completed, what's coming up. And obviously you can configure it to work to your own projects. The other thing that I'm a really big fan of is using something like Zapier to link apps together so that you can set automations and triggers, and you can do that without knowing a single line of code or anything. It basically talks you through. It integrates into pretty much, I think, all of the tools that we've talked about today. And I think that if you can be saving those sort of 5 to 10 minutes here and there, then in the long run, as you scale and grow, it'll contribute significantly to productivity.
Absolutely. So just on Zapier, I love that tool. And one of the best use cases would be I use Unbounce to build our landing pages for our marketing activities. So as a lead comes in, we link a Zap to HubSpot, but also to Slack. So that Zapier Zap would notify everyone on Slack that we got a new lead, and then it connects to HubSpot, and it does all that stuff for you. So it's brilliant. It's a brilliant tool, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. And I guess just to add that there's loads of templates on there as well, and use cases. So sometimes you might be using things like Google Sheets and I don't know, and Slack and calendars, and sort of not knowing what the opportunities are in terms of simplifying process. So if you go on there and look at the apps that you're using, it will tell you what most people have commonly paired them to do and to achieve. And it's certainly worth spending a good amount of time really getting to grips with that, because I think it's incredibly useful. So some fantastic tools there. We'll endeavour to pop them all in a post and share that on social media a little bit later. I wanted to move on to wellbeing, and we touched a bit on it earlier, Chu, but the last year and a half has had tremendous impact on so many people for so many different reasons. And what do you think from a personal point of view, when looking at your employees and looking at your team, what have you seen reduce productivity? And I guess how have you dealt with that? How have you overcome?
Sure. So for me, productivity, it's a function of meeting goals or not, right? So, or meeting expectations. So naturally, when you assess and you ask someone if, or you look at a problem or a situation and try to figure out whether that's the person's been productive or not, you almost have to ask yourself as a leader, have I been really clear with the goals, right? And if the goals aren't clear, then you can't blame that they're not productive, because they may not know exactly what they're trying to do, what you want them to do, or the speed in which you expect them to complete a task. So really, it's two sides to this situation, right? Being very productive is a function of matching up to the expectations and goals of a manager. So my point here is just be really clear in terms of your goals. And the other thing to bear in mind is what brings down productivity is a lack of communication, especially around challenges, blockers. When people are stressed out because they have too much to do, they can't solve the problem that's in front of them, creates anxiety and stress. And this is like, I can't solve this. Like I said, the example of the Excel from like formula you can't create or whatever. These are blockers. These are blockers that you need to address as a manager and say, look, if you spend more than 5 or 10 or whatever time on a problem, you can't fix it, stop. Tell me or tell somebody else, because that's a waste of your time. Someone else might know the answer to that. So communication around things that may drive, you can see that coming in terms of reduced productivity. You need to address it. So just to summarize, make the goals really clear. Make sure that any blockers and challenges are addressed, but also create a culture. It's a word that's really popular. It's around psychological safety, a culture of psychological safety, where people can say, hey, I actually don't know the answer, or I'm really stressed out, or I'm burnt out. You need to create that, or else it will just get bottled up. And this whole concept of psychological safety, I encourage you to sort of look into it, is really important as a management tool to understanding that is. And where people, it's not about showing that you're not capable. It's showing that you are actually very empathetic as a person. So look, I understand where you're coming from. It's a challenge. Let's address this as a team. It's not about being weak or not being capable. It's about being really resilient and resourceful. That's the other way to look at that, right? So if you say, hey, look, you can't solve this problem yourself, find someone else to help you solve it. And that's how you spin or turn a situation from a negative to a positive. It's like, look, I encourage resourcefulness across my team. Okay, it's not a sign of weakness. If anything, you're solving a problem faster, and because of that, you're more productive, and that's what everyone wants.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely great advice. And I think the thread that's running through all of this is that communication is so intrinsically linked to productivity. And I guess you touched upon it earlier, but how can and how have you in the past and present used employee feedback systems to boost productivity? Because there's the old saying, isn't there, that you build a successful business by surrounding yourself with people who are better than you at the bit that they do. So how can we, particularly in a remote world, use that employee feedback, use that input to better our productivity, better our systems, and I guess overall better our business?
Yeah, well, it's harder, obviously. In the sort of pre-COVID, obviously you have lunch together with teams and colleagues. You can read between the lines and how those water cooler moments where you can tease apart problems and issues, or pubs, drinks at the pub. These are great settings for creating great culture, but also assessing issues and problem solving. We need to kind of replicate that online now, right? So like I said, remote working makes it really hard for some people to communicate. It makes it actually easier for others to communicate as well, because some people are very, very articulate through typing it up, rather than talking about these things. It's actually easier for some people and hard for others. You need to recognize the differences between these people and address it. Anonymous surveys are really important if you can. Sometimes if you have a really small team, that's probably not possible, but where possible, get that kind of feedback. Sometimes you do, if you have a coach or a third party HR advisor who can be a trusted third party that they can go to for sort of mental health support, kind of offload things, I suppose. It's always good to have within the organization that's not tied to the organization, but it's almost like an HR consultant that will listen to employees and kind of understand their concerns. There are lots of benefits and well-being platforms out there that can help ease some of this stuff. But I guess the key thing about improving productivity is to kind of recognize it as a problem, or recognize it as an opportunity, and constantly address it. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's no silver bullet to fixing all these problems, but it should be a top of your agenda as a manager or as a leader organization. That's like how is my team doing, and always paying attention to that. Some people mix that in with culture, but it shouldn't be. The culture is like the backdrop. You have a great culture and you support and develop your culture. Productivity typically falls in line with that. So people are when people are the happiest is when they do their best, and that's really the basic premise of all of this. You want people who are doing their best, doing the right job, and the job that when you feel like you're playing and having fun, you're not really working, really. And so I've read this great article about Elon Musk, and people just try to figure out, well, how can someone have 3-4 companies work 68 hours a week and not get burnt out and stressed out. And so the crux of the story was he's actually working, he's having fun. Elon loves what he does. He wouldn't, even if he's not working, this is what he'd be thinking about. So in essence, that's a key thing about putting the right people in the right roles, supporting that with the right culture. And so if they're having fun, enjoying what they're doing, you'll see the productivity go up, the culture is going to improve, and a lot of these things will solve itself.
That's a brilliant answer. We've had a great question come in. There are some roles that are far easier to manage productivity than others. Some you can easily look at numbers generated, calls made, whatever it may be, whatever the output is. How do you ensure that you have this consistent productivity expectations when a role doesn't necessarily command exactly the same sort of modular output, I guess.
Yeah. Like I said before, there are two types of roles that are normally grouped. The sort of production based or up. Clearly the roles that you can clearly link the time spent and process driven roles are easy to manage and easy to coach and improve. There's a big chunk of the organization, or for some organizations, the majority of the organization are what we call discretion based roles, where we don't really want to micromanage them because that will inhibit productivity and creativity. But at the same time, you need them to deliver. And that for me is probably the hardest area to kind of really focus on. And you almost have to solve that by looking at each person individually, understanding their drivers and the blockers. So you need to have almost like more precise one-to-one time with more precise, I guess, when you have one-to-ones with these people, ask more precise questions. It's my point. Don't just say, how is it going? Are you okay? You should say, okay, what are the biggest challenges you've seen this week? What's causing that? How do you solve that? What do you need help with? And so from these types of questioning, you get a better sense of, are they doing their very best, or they're just missing big gaps of areas that could help them improve their productivity. And once you kind of know the general areas and themes, you kind of bring that up every time. So how's communication happening? Or how's this, client doing the management of clients, whatever it is, you start structuring these conversations around areas that are productivity blockers with these people. And hopefully over time, you get more efficient in that as well, yourself as a manager. That's my best advice. I don't have a silver bullet answer for that, but it really is the harder thing. But when you recognize it's a harder thing to kind of fix, you spend time optimizing it. It's really about listening and asking the right questions to kind of feel yourself, to get a good feel for yourself, whether that person is productive or not.
And you mentioned there sort of listening and then optimizing. And I completely appreciate that the answer is going to be different for different types of businesses and different types of functions. But you as a leader, how often when a new process that is meant to improve productivity is put in place, how often will you review it? And how long will you give it before you perhaps further optimize it or decide that maybe it wasn't the right path to go down?
Wow, that's a good question. It's also a really hard question to answer. Depends on how much patience you have, I guess, is one answer. When you deploy something new, you really have to hear it from very multiple perspectives. Especially when it's touching areas that are quite sort of gray area, like like I said, these discretionary kind of based work. You need to understand, from management down, whether this program is actually working, and also talk about whether it's actually being utilized the way it should be. Like back to my point about HubSpot or Salesforce. Like at first I thought it's not something I need to know in detail, but I realized that if I don't know in detail, I won't be able to ask my team the right questions. And that's one thing to bear in mind. New tools, everyone needs to at least spend a good amount of time learning it, understanding it before writing it off. Or holding on to something that may not work, but you thought, okay, it's better than nothing, but you really don't know how much better it is. So, I think there's no shortcut to this. It's about spending time really understanding the tools and the process before making an assessment. That's my point.
And have you ever come to a point where you think there's been a conflict with you and your team in terms of a system or a tool that should be used? How do you deal with that? I mean, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's actually, we don't normally have that many conflicts. It's more about just asking real basic questions. Like, here's how much it's going to cost us. Is it worth it? Firstly, if it's worth it, then what's the value? What's the return? And I guess put the onus on the people who are using it to justify it as well, right? If you really want it and we want to keep it, we need to make sure that we get this output from it. And I think it's important to be unbiased as a manager, because when you state your views first, it taints everyone else's responses. So let's just, when we come into a very contentious topic like that, always speak last. That's my best advice. Generally speaking, as a leader, like whenever you walk into a room, you want to get feedback, never speak first, because what happens is that you're not going to get the answers you want, or at least, you'll taint the answers you get. So that's the process I'll take, just get everyone's views and kind of, and then you put, make it very constructive, really. I think that's the thing. It's not about who shouts the loudest either, right? It's like, okay, who delivers, what can this deliver for the business? And at what cost? It's always a cost thing, ultimately. Productivity is cost, because you can hire 1,000 people if cost was an issue and you get the job done, right? But, in the day, it is limited resources that we have to deal with.
Fantastic. Well, look, Chu, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. We're just about to sort of round off the session. I've had quite a few people ask if this is going to be available on demand. It will be, and we'll make sure that everybody has the link, as well as previous sessions in this series. Chu, if I was to ask you for your top productivity tip, just to leave the session, what would you leave the audience with?
For me, first thing is set the right goals. Make sure the goals are clearly understood. As a manager, as a leader, you need to repeat it multiple times. Make sure that people understand it. Make sure that you understand what are the challenges to those goals as well. So it's not about setting goals that are not achievable. It has to be achievable, and people need to buy into that. Once the goals are set, deploy it. Make sure that people follow through. But when you deploy it and you get people to follow through, understand the obstacles and challenges to that, and really allow them to feedback. It's like, we can't achieve that because of this, that, and the other. And that links to creating a culture of, like I said before, psychological safety, where people say, hey, look, I can say what's on my mind, and it's being listened to and it's being addressed. And from there, you solve the problems that do come up. So if they say, hey, look, I need training, or I need this, or I need that, you take it seriously. And it could be other things, like I can't work because, the other thing I forgot to mention is, like, in this COVID time, a lot of people work from home, but they don't have a proper setup. One of the biggest problems I've spoken to a friend of mine who's actually sort of does a lot of work around sort of well-being, physical well-being. The biggest problem with what we have right now is actually people are sitting on the wrong chairs. They sit in the kitchen chairs. It's like work, it's affecting their back, resulting in low productivity. But just to follow through on that, set the goals, understand the challenges for the goals, and then follow on the solutions. And there's lots of solutions out there, whether it's technology, the workplace, asking colleagues for help, being resourceful, and hopefully all that together can help you create a great business and more successful.
What a fantastic summary. And we've had some really lovely comments. And as Richard says here, great insights, obviously, really when you hear them so clearly articulated. So thank you so much, Chu. You can connect with Chu on LinkedIn. We've sent the details to the chat. We will let everybody know when this session is ready on demand. And Chu, I guess if I don't see you before, I'll see you in about a month's time for the Great British Entrepreneur Awards national final.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Really, really pleased. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.